Hey, friends, good morning and welcome to the live stream podcast. And again, I just want to say these podcasts are going awesome. I'm loving every minute of it. It is just so um, delightful and enjoyable and just life giving. And I just looked a little earlier this morning, and already from last week's Facebook Live, in 5 days, 1,200 views, and just continue to get an increase in interest and conversation. And I'm grateful. So this series is about when God shows up, and I feel like I went too slow, but I was telling. Kind of building and setting up this story of Iran. I have not practiced for this story. I don't try to practice or script, but just to tell my heart and story, and maybe that will change over time. But my goal today is to wrap this up. And I was connecting two pieces of my relationship with my dad and this trip to Iran. And amidst of that is we're in transition. So fast recap, because I don't want to take too much time on that. The recap is simply this. This was 2003. We knew there was a decision that was needing to be made. And we felt from God that 2003 was not the time to make a decision. And boom, a few months later in September, we get this offer to lead healthcare ministries. We are given until February to make a decision. And so it remains on the table. And in the meanwhile, when that offer came, this unique incident happened that I unpacked, and if you didn't catch it, please watch it again. But I meet a gentleman at a hospital in Calcutta. This guy months later writes me, crazy story. My dad is working on his radiator, and there's just this, God is doing something and I don't get it or understand it. In the midst of that, the Lord speaks to me and says, work on your relationship with your dad, and I'll make your future clear. My Aunt Nancy gets involved, and we have a late night conversation with my dad. And now, December 26, 2003, an earthquake in Iran. And at that point, I had an area of responsibility with the Assemblies of God in disaster relief response. We were partnering with Convoy. If you're not familiar with Convoy, convoyofhope.org, great humanitarian organization, not first responders, but quick responders all across the world. They're dear friends. They tie into a lot of the work we do at Calcutta. Hal Donaldson, the founder, had an amazing vision or epiphany in our Calcutta hospital and had a word of the Lord, and just good people. So anyway, it's December 26, 2003, and we begin a process where we would go to Iran to do relief work. And Convoy of Hope, with myself representing Assemblies of God Eurasia. Now, in this, you have to understand a couple of things. Number one is Iran and the U.S. do not have diplomatic relationships, didn't have them in 2003. An Iranian coming to America, United Nations building in New York, 23-mile radius, that's as far as they can travel. And so Iran and the U.S., it's just not easy to get an Iranian visa. So we began working, Convoy of Hope and Assemblies of God Eurasia, and a friend of mine who was with Healthcare Ministries, the place that I've been invited to lead, Rick Silvato. Rick Silvato is just a dear friend. I've been with him in many countries, physician assistant, degrees from Harvard and Yale, just a deep understanding of what relief and development looks like. And Kenton Moody was the international director for Convoy. So Kenton, Bob, and Rick are working on going to Iran, no visa. So we make a decision to travel to London, which is the closest place to negotiate a visa as Americans. We'd heard some rumors that Americans were being allowed in without a visa, but that's not a great scenario. You could show up and be turned around. And so we would go to the Iranian consulate, which was near, maybe a mile away from the actual Iranian embassy. We went 2 or 3 days in a row, and we kept being told, "Come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow." We just weren't getting anywhere. Side note: at that moment in history, in 2003, Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida, and Elizabeth Dole was the international director of the Red Cross. Um, Neither one of them could get visas, and they never did in the end. And so here we are at the Indian consulate, and the saying was, "Come back tomorrow, inshallah." And inshallah, for those of you non-Muslims, it just means according to the will of God, according to Allah's will. And I remember the second or third day that the gentleman had said this, I was just being a little humorous. As you know, Bengali Bob, I can be a little witty, tell a joke. And I said, "Sir, I heard you say inshallah," and he looked at me and, figured I was not a Muslim, which I'm not. And he's but a little shocked. And I said, "I understand inshallah means according to the will of God." And he says, "Yes." I said, "I'm not worried about the will of God. We're supposed to go. I'm worried about your will and the will of the Iranian people." And he laughed. And anyways, we called it a day. But as we're heading back to where we were staying, Kenton from Convoy said, let's call the Iranian embassy and try to get just a short appointment." And so, um, in the interest of time, he negotiated about a 3 or 4 or 5 minute meeting. He got permission. And so we arrived at the Iranian embassy, and we had been staying with some Iranians who were in London. And they were so concerned about us going that they did not even want to drop us off at the Iranian embassy, but near it, and pray that everything would go well. So we get in, and there are only two people there. One was kind of the tea maker, doorkeeper, maintenance guy, just the do everything. This is on a Saturday. And then the other person was and I believe his title, I have his name, but for security, I don't want to tell it on this podcast. But he was at that point the secretary, the first secretary. He was in charge of the Iranian embassy on the weekend. And so we meet with him, and it was an amazing meeting. In fact, like I said, Kenton had negotiated a 3 minute meeting. And we're about 20 minutes in, 30 minutes in. I think we were there a good hour and a half to 2 hours in our 3 minute meeting. And we talked about all kinds of things. And remember, if you're a Christian and you're in the Islamic Republic of Iran embassy, probably, and you're an American, United States. So what two things would you not want to talk about? Perhaps politics and religion. And boy, did we talk on those topics. We talk about faith. As the gentleman in charge, I just want to call him that, and I were kind of interacting with each other and comparing notes. And those of you that know the U.S.-Iran history, the end of President Carter's term going into President Reagan's term, we had American hostages. I believe it was 453 of them were in Tehran, held. That same time frame, I was in the Air Force. I joined the Air Force September 21st, 1979. I graduated from basic training on November 6th and traveled to Lackland Air Force Base it was actually at Lackland Air Force Base, but I was just about graduating. I got to get my story straight here. So November 6th was graduation day, but somewhere in that time frame, November 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of 1979, a unique thing happened. And if you follow the history records, you'll know this, but the Shah of Iran was deposed. He was overthrown, and he had medical issues. And so he was sent to Lackland Air Force Base, where I was in basic training. And so now here I am in 1979, looking around, seeing Iranian Air Force pilots and fighter jets, And I'm 18 years old, and I'm thinking, what the heck? You talk about conspiracy theory and Zone 51 and UFOs, and here I am, basic training, 18 years old, and there's Iranian pilots, people speaking languages other than English, and fighter jets, and but I'm talking about this in London, England, at the People's Islamic Republic of Iran embassy, a place you probably don't want to be talking about those kinds of things, but there was a presence of God. And we're talking about when God breaks through. And again, if you know this and understand it, I don't need to explain it. If you don't know it or understand it, I'd love to talk to you some other time, but it's hard to really talk about it except to talk about it. God was in that embassy, present just in an amazing way. And so we're probably at or close or over the 2 hour mark of a several minute meeting. I'm sure the guy who had dropped us off was very nervous. We know he was, because he talked with us later. Were we being held hostage? Was something going on? And we're ending the meeting. It's this awkward thing. And multiple times, Kenton and Rick and I said to this gentleman that was in charge of the embassy, we said, sir, because we went to get a visa, but the friendship was so beautiful, and the presence of God. And side note, when God is present, you don't have to fight, because God is your fighter. Amen. And so we didn't feel like we had to fight for a visa, and we just said to him, maybe in God's big understanding of the world, he just brought us together as a couple of ambassadors, goodwill ambassadors, that we are on a goodwill mission of Iran, and that we can speak better of Iran. And you're on a goodwill mission of the United States, and you can speak better of America. But it's time to go. And nobody's really bringing closure to this. We're not saying we've got to go, because God was so present. And that officer looked at us, and he was just in this bewildered state, and he just said, what's happening right now? Because God was so present, we were comfortable, he was not. And we're looking at him and like, what do you mean? He goes, what's happening here? And we really don't have an answer. Again, if you understand God's presence, you understand it. And we're like, well, what do you mean? And he just said, you guys seem comfortable. I'm not, but there's something happening here. And finally he said, he looked at me eye to eye, and he said, Mr. Bob, what do you do in a moment like this? And I said, sir, we pray. And he said, that's it, we must pray. And he put his hands up. We prayed this short prayer, and we hugged each other, and again, we just reiterated, we did not want anything from him. Again, our source is God, it's not man. And sometimes men help us, but even then they're instruments of God. And so we got in the car, and with our Iranian brother who had dropped us off, and we were talking, and we were praying, and we were laughing, and we were just amazed at the moment. And finally got around. He said, "Well, did you get visas?" And we all just kind of laughed and said, "No, but God was in this." So, but the goal was a visa, and we didn't have one. About 10 minutes later, this officer called, and he called the cell phone, and he said, I have spoken with Tehran, and they are going to issue you visas. Jeb Bush and Elizabeth Dole, I apologize, but we outranked you on this one. We're going to issue you visas, and we've called Iranian Air, and we've reserved seats for you, so you will be able to fly, and the flight will be tomorrow at whatever time that was. So he said, but what you have to do is come tomorrow morning the to the visa consular's office. It will open somewhere between 10 and noon, but I would suggest being there at 10. So we got there a little bit before 10, and there was a line. I mean, it was at least 75 to 100 deep. And it wasn't just a line of, like, I've lived in India and Bangladesh, and I've seen lines at embassies and consular offices and just ordinary people. But there were camera crews, BBC, CNN, Fox News. They were all there. And there were camera crews, and they had their uniforms, and they had their camera equipment, and they were in line. And so we were towards the back of the line, And eventually the doors opened. I don't remember the exact time. I know it was between 10 and noon. And a man gets out, and he's got one of these Mike Bullhorn type deals. And he said, would the three gentlemen who were in my office, in my boss's office yesterday, please come forward? The three American gentlemen. And so we may or may not have strutted past CNN and BBC and others. And we got in there, and he said, well, I don't know why, but there is an order from Tehran that we are to issue you visas. So we're going to give you visas, but there's a complication. And I'm just thinking, whatever complication, we've got to solve it. And I said, well, what's the complication? He said, well, I have worked here for 18 years. And every visa requires a fee, even if it's nominal, like £1 British, $1 Canadian, one, he said, and it's part of the paperwork that there is a monetary transaction, which is a legal requirement for you to obey the rules and so forth. And he said, but in 18 years, I've never issued an American visa. So I don't know what currency I'm supposed to charge you. So I'm going to have to call Tehran. So please be seated. I'll call Tehran and I'll get back to you. And so immediately I'm looking at the board and I'm seeing all the visa rates, and I'm just thinking, how can I get this guy to not make a phone call to Tehran, because maybe we'll get denied. And I said, sir, you see up there, you have the Canadian rate. Canada is actually North America, and as Americans, we're North Americans. So can we pay you $1 Canadian? And he said, absolutely. We got our visas. We're just dumbfounded by this. We declined the offer of Iranian Air. We felt it was better to be on our own schedule. We get to Iran, and I'm just going to be brief because some of these things are so beautiful and sacred that I sometimes don't fully tell the story. But the first thing I would say, and to you that are Americans that are watching this, and especially Christian Americans talking about an Islamic Iran, but just Americans in general, we have a certain understanding of what our relationship is to Iran, and it's not presented by God, but it's presented by BBC, CNN, Fox, and others. And when we were in Iran, I can tell you many times and places and ways we would be asked, and sometimes it would be whispered in our ear, are you an American? And I remember one time this person came up to me and just so gently just leaned in and whispered, are you an American? And I said, yes. And that person kissed my hand and just touched me. And what I can tell you is the Iranian people have a different view of America than what you and I consider it to be. And that's firsthand. It's 21 and a half years old, but that's firsthand. And 21 and a half years ago, our position in Iran and what we would all think is probably not changed in all these years. But I can tell you the Iranian people, beautiful people and gentle. So now we're going to do the relief work that we came there to do. And there's so many other stories in this, and I don't have time to tell all of them, but I am going to say we were on mission. We were able to do what we needed to do. We were able to go to an area where in this earthquake in Bam, Iran, and in the city of Bam, especially Rick Silvato, the expert in relief and development, was able to talk with all of the school headmasters of that area. There were about 15 of them. Everybody except Rick Kenton and I had prayer caps on because we were the only non-Muslims that were there. We were respected. We were treated with dignity. We were fed, and our advice was listened to. And courtesy of the Assembly of God World Missions and a missionary tent company that had built a tent for an evangelist to speak at, we were able to secure that tent within days between FedEx and DHL donating, and shout out to FedEx and DHL. They were able to get the tent, I believe, as close as Turkey, and then it was by other means brought in, and we were able to help build a temporary school. Many of the people we worked with in Iran were able to set this tent up. The building had been destroyed, and even if they were in the same building, look left, look right, 1 out of 3 kids would be dead. They could never be back in that school situation. But Rick Salvato was able to walk and talk them through that scenario. So much got done. Shout out to Convoy of Hope, willing to go to the ends of the earth to reach people because they deserve to be reached. We went into homes, even when there were language barriers, just holding a hand and just being a listening ear, even when you couldn't understand. Sometimes we had translators, sometimes we didn't, but love and compassion and empathy speaks languages that we know not of. And when we were able to do that, and I remember one man, I'd been with him for hours, and just by him pointing and crying, I was able to know that he had survived the house and he had lost children and family members. And then he was able to find someone to translate, and he told the whole story. And he said, so many people come and they just throw food at us. We don't need food. We need listening ears, and just beautiful. But I want to just end with this one story that I may get a little emotional of, but this is a God breaking through story. We there was a location which was kind of like the command center of relief work, and you got to know somebody to get in. And I know Convoy knows people, but it would have taken them hours, days, phone calls across the world to make the connections, and it may have been harder. Who knows? But we had found out this kind of football stadium area, which was kind of the triage, or probably the better word would be the command post of relief organizations. And so we had gone up there, and we tried to talk our way through, and they said, you got to do this, and you got to fill out forms, and you got to go back to Tehran, and you got to meet so-and-so. And it just would have eaten more time and created less performance or less ability to accomplish. And so we just had this prayer at that opening area. Think of a big football stadium, and you don't have a ticket, kind of thing. And you're told to go back to the Capitol to get the ticket, which is in itself, how are you going to do it, and who you're going to see there, and how long are you going to wait, and whatnot. But we just couldn't get in. And so, because this is early in the response team of international people. And so we just prayed this simple prayer, nothing super deep or spiritual. And we start walking back to where the taxis would be, that we could get a taxi back to where we were staying. And as we started to walk, this old car, and it was very much a U.S. looking car. I remember my mom had a Plymouth Valiant, 1975. Wasn't a 75 Plymouth Valiant, but kind of that kind of look. If you're into cars, it was painted a dark color. And these two men get out. I mean, suits. I don't remember if they had a tie or not. And they both get out of the car. The passenger comes over, and he said, "Are you the 3 Americans?" Where does that come from? You're in Bam, Iran. Who's looking for us? Who's looking out for us? The unexplainable. And, we said yes. And then, almost like a CIA intel sort of arrogance, the man just says, "Get in the car." And now it's like, oh no, are we going to jail? Are we in trouble? We got the visas, but now it's caught up to us. And the car drives right to the center of the command post, the ticket place where we didn't have a ticket, says something, I'm sure it was in Farsi, and almost immediately, and we had never seen it happen while we were there, these large gates are opened, and they drive, I don't know how, if you think of it of a quarter-mile track, about a third of the way into the track, sort of thing. And he said, "This is where you need to be. You need to go talk to those people." And we said, "Okay." And we thanked them, but they're just militant, serious, and we go to this place, and we talked to some people, and they gave us some leads. It wasn't like the place, but they helped us and so forth. And they said, "Well, how did you manage to get in?" And they said, "Well, these 2 guys in a car, and they took us here." And they said, there's no cars here. Look around. How did you get here?" And we turned around, and there They weren't there. God broke through. That's all. That's all that I can say. And I have been a follower of Jesus for 45 years of my life, and I'll continue to follow him because he does break through, and he helps us, and he walks with us, and that's my Ron story. There's so many more pieces, and I'm going to spare you talking any further, except to say God does break through. I hope he breaks through for you. If some of what I'm saying is confusing or you have further questions, dialogue with me. My email is bengalibob at gmail, bengalibob at gmail.com. You can reach me on Facebook. Would love for you to sign up if as a next step. If you've been interested in the things I'm sharing, please become a subscriber on YouTube. Facebook is hit and miss because sometimes I can send invites, sometimes I can't. It's all algorithm based as to whether you're going to see or not see. But if you subscribe to YouTube, you'll get my information. And if you miss a live stream, my goal is to have everything on YouTube. God bless you. And my prayer for you is that God will show up in your life with whatever it is that you need him to show up, whatever season you're in. Take care, and thanks for listening.